Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment, episode number 95. And John, I don't want to waste a moment because I think today this topic is so crucial to everybody, especially those that are in ministry. And so introduce it. What are we talking about today?
The title of our pod today, Jim, is the new metrics.
New metrics. What to measure. Yeah. Oh, so hard.
Yeah, COVID-19, the pandemic and the quarantine associated with it radically impacted the way churches measure success.
Yes.
It turned historical metrics on their head. For many churches prior to the pandemic, dare I say most churches, prior to the pandemic, the metric was ABC: attendance, buildings, cash.
Yeah.
Right? That was, or for those churches that were a little more spiritual, the numbers that screamed success included salvations, baptisms, small group participation, serve rate.
But can I say, in 30 years of ministry, no one's ever come to me and said, so how many people did you baptize last year? They always say, how many people are you running?
There you go.
And I don't know why we do that, but maybe I do and I don't want to talk about it, but there's how many you're running. So how many you're running, what's the size of your church? I'm like, I don't know. The average person's probably about 200 pounds, I would guess, and just how do you answer that?
And even those stats, and I like some of those other measures, baptisms, things like that, but even that got turned on its head.
Yeah.
In the last 16 months. What do you think about that? Just as you look at the landscape, Jim, and what's changed in terms of metrics, what's your perspective?
Well, I think two things. I think number one, I'm not God, but if I were, shaking it up so that we ask the right questions versus the wrong questions would be something I would employ. I would want something that was being trusted in that was a bad foundation to be broken up before people built too much on it. The second thing I think is this, that I don't know anybody, I know very few, I would say 3 to 5% of the churches that have more in physical attendance now than they did 18 months ago. Very, very rare. The average I'm finding is probably somewhere around 70-ish%, down to about 30%. And depending on Washington, D.C., 30%. Fenton, 70, 80%. Sterling Heights, 70, 80%.
Right. So,
but it seems odd because there's less people attending, but there seems to be a greater commitment from those who attend. And this is the wrong word because it makes it sound like people were dead and we cut them off, but pruning. It feels like we're doing more with less because we, which are alive and remain, are a different type than those who just kind of went to their favorite theater on a semi-monthly basis to get a movie that inspired them to be a better whatever. So I think it's been good for the church, but what we measured for success and failure, literally we've had to just throw out that old model. You have to for two reasons. One, it doesn't paint the right picture. And two, it's so depressing to look at. You have to find, we're 70% of stop. We're 100% of today. We're not 70% of a year ago. We're 100% of today. And the question that's the right question to ask, the right questions to ask, we need to ask those questions.
Yeah. So I think COVID really did expose that tendency of ours, right, to look at those numbers, those categories, as lead measures rather than lag measures. Let me explain.
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah, a lag measure has to do with the result,
right,
or the fruit of something, right? A lead measure is the driver or drivers that affected that result or contributed to it. So a lead measure has to do with process. It has to do with approach.
Right.
Lead measures are things that we actually can control.
Yes. Yeah.
Lag measures have to do with outcomes.
Right.
And fruit. And lag measures are what we can't control.
Right.
Jim, when I was a campus pastor about 5 years ago, I was one of the biggest revelations of that 1 year journey that I took was how little control I had over who showed up.
Yes.
But I had full control over the experience they had when they did.
Right.
And so I think it's time for us to be talking about metrics. And
I agree.
Here's the theory. If we improve the lead measures, we probably will enhance the lag measures.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So
absolutely.
The new metrics, I think, Jim, are going to be more art than science. More art than mathematical. And it shouldn't shock us, right? I mean, the Apostle Paul really had this figured out, right? He said, I planted and Apollos watered. Yeah. Those are lead measures.
Yeah.
But God gave the growth. That's a lag measure.
Right.
And I wonder, and I don't say this to be hypercritical. I'm just throwing myself into this as well. Did we get it wrong during those years prior to the pandemic? Were we measuring lags when we really should be focusing more on the leads?
Well, and the thing is, I can manipulate the lags. I can bring in a guest speaker. I can have flaming angels swinging from this, and I'm not saying those things are wrong at all. Right. I mean, but I'm saying that if the only thing I value is that number and I associate that with my success or failure before God and man, I'll do an awful lot of things to increase seating capacity without really thinking about sending capacity and discipleship. So we can get off base if the only thing we're concerned about is that Sunday morning number. We can get in big trouble real fast.
Yeah. So Jim, I don't have my arms all the way around this one yet.
Yeah.
If I just want to be perfectly transparent with those who are listening or watching today, I'm still wrestling with this. But is it okay if we just kind of wrestle with this together? And we may not come to any great conclusions today, so we apologize in advance if you're disappointed. But I just would like to share some possible ideas, some lead measure metrics that might be possible for us moving forward.
Right.
Does that sound good?
Perfect. Hit me.
Okay, so here's the first one. A flawless guest experience.
Yes.
From the parking lot to the lobby into the worship center, what is the guest experience?
Yeah.
How does our church, how do our people communicate care and genuine interest from the street all the way to the seat?
Yeah.
How do we shape a guest-focused culture? I said it earlier, we can't control who walks in the door, but when they do, let's ensure that they find true heart connection with other people and a reason to come back. People are not going to come back necessarily because of the great preaching. Mm-hmm. They're going to come back because they met somebody who connected with them and showed interest in them. The first year at our campus, Jim, we had over 500 guests come to our campus when we launched the church 5 years ago. That's an amazing number in 1 year for a church in a small community, 500 guests. Yeah. And we probably retained, I would say we probably retained 30%, which is 3 times the national average. How did we do that? I think we did it because we were relentless about this first lead measure, this guest experience. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think we all know this to be true, even though, leaders don't walk into their business more than once and pastors don't walk into for the first time more than once. But when we walk into a store, we decide right away if it's well managed, if it's clean, if it's orderly, if it's organized. We look at the people, we look at the product, we look at the placement, we decide whether or not this is a Walmart or a Target, or a Dillard's. We can tell. And I think that walking from the street to the seat, there's a lot more decisions being made than we're aware of. I think people have already categorized, already wondering what they're doing here, or so glad that things are going well. And I think too, Chad Dearman, who's been on our podcast in the past, he made a statement probably 20 years ago. I never forgot. He said, people want to go to a friendly church for about 3 weeks. And then after that, they want friends. And so to have that built into your systems, where every 50 chairs, there's a volunteer pastor, if you will, that memorizes names and remembers stories, and somebody raises their hand, they minister to them. That sort of personal. In a high-tech world, we really value high-touch places, and to be that place where they walk in and it's, why do people go to bars? Why do people go to clubs? Why do people go to join gangs? It's people want to belong somewhere, and when the local church becomes that place where they're valued, then it opens the door for what the church is actually there to do, which is to lead them to Jesus and make disciples.
Right, and Jim, one more thought on that first point.
Yeah.
Is when we were part of that campus, we insisted that everybody on our leadership team function as a guest-focused person.
Yes. Yeah.
And we said to everybody who served, you're on the connection team. If you are on the worship team, you're on the connection team. If you're in children's ministry, you're on the connection team. If you are in the tech booth, you are on the connection team. And we were relentless about that. And we modeled that, and we rewarded that and celebrated that when that happened. And it was just amazing to see, not only was it programmed in a way, but it became part of the DNA of that campus.
It's great.
And people, I haven't been the campus pastor there for 4 years, and it's still our home base. And when we're there, it is so awesome to see that DNA still there.
Yeah, that's special.
It's really special, and it's doable.
That's secret sauce. Yeah, that is secret sauce type stuff. I think if we spend 5 hours preparing for a 30-minute sermon, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you spend 5 minutes saying, be friendly to people today, let's say a quick prayer and go do it, you may have been better putting one of those 5 hours, 4 hours in your sermon and 1 hour into having training time with that team to create that culture. That is huge. I love that.
So here's another lead measure I'd like to suggest, and again, none of these are in stone, but these are just thoughts I've been having, is a crisp, powerful worship encounter.
Sure.
And I think churches would do well to conduct an honest evaluation of the worship experience.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sometimes it's hard for churches to do that, right? Because they can't see the forest for the trees. And but I've observed this as we've come alongside, been invited into a church to put a fresh set of eyes on the worship experience, among other things.
Yeah. Often,
Jim, there is this insider bias in a worship encounter and worship experience. And one of the questions I think we could ask, or several sets of questions we could ask ourselves as leaders, is how do we determine that if our church has got an insider bias or not? Well, one, if you only use terms insiders understand, you may have an insider bias.
Yeah.
If you assume guests know what to expect on a weekend gathering, you may have an insider bias, right? So when I was a campus pastor, every Sunday we would start I would introduce who I was.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to assume people knew who I was. Yeah. And we wanted to say, welcome to any guests that are here. Here's what's going to happen today. Here's what to expect.
Right.
And then in the middle, the transition between worship and the preaching, we made sure that we welcomed the guests again and gave them opportunity to let us know they were there and all that kind of stuff. When we assume guests know what to expect, we probably have insider bias.
Yeah.
Let me give you one more. When our gatherings are sloppy and they have wasted time and they don't invite the presence of God and the presence of Jesus into the room, we've lost some of the things that's made the church compelling all along. Look, people need good information, but they also need power encounters with the living God.
Yeah.
And so creating space, here's a question to ask under the second crisp, powerful worship encounter metric is, are we creating space for God to do what he wants to do?
Right.
Within the confines of our gatherings. And I know if you're running multiple services, I'm telling you, I know the pressure of that, right? That there's a time constraint, there's a time pressure. But I'm just wondering, is this a possible lead measure, a crisp, powerful worship encounter? What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I think too, especially with COVID, with the altars are not open, nobody's praying with people. We're dismissing all together now. Everybody stand up and leave. Mm-hmm. And now with, most of that being all over with, I think in 99% of the people's minds, 99% of the church's, programming, regaining that muscle hasn't worked in over a year. So now, hey, during worship, if you want to come to the altar and have if you need prayer for the sick, I think you almost need to have a resurgence or a grand reopening of encounters with God, because I've preached and you've preached thousands of sermons, but it's the things that God has said to us personally that's changed our lives. It's not, I mean, sermons have helped me, and sermons to me are kind of like meals. I don't know what I had a week ago, but I know that I'm still using it. I know that it made me healthy today, but that encounter with God, when God speaks to you from a burning bush and it's him, that needs to be part of what people come expecting, right? What are the advantages of walking into your building versus just staying at home and watching it on your computer? One of that is that you're together in a corporate setting and making room for God to move. We're not honestly, we're struggling with this one, John. We're not finding our way back to where we were. The altars are open and nobody comes forward. Like, that's weird. It used to be full. It's our young people that led the charge. So what happened? Well, our young people stayed home. They're watching it online. Their community on Monday night or Wednesday night, or, so we are missing something. And the old people never led that. Old people, the people that are in their 50s, the really old people, So we're trying to recapture that. I think you're absolutely right. I think people come for a variety of reasons: to see people, to encounter God, to have a corporate worship experience. And if we say, well, you can't see people, there's no time to encounter God, and so just enjoy the sermon and the music, I think people will stay home. I can get that at home without walking through the doors.
So here's a third idea of a new metric. And this one's a little bit long. So just if you're taking notes, and we'll have show notes, by the way, for this, so you won't have to scramble too hard. An organic and organized approach to discipling new believers and even seasoned believers.
Absolutely.
Who've never been discipled.
Yes.
Jim, I surrendered my life to Jesus at age 16. Yeah. And within 24 hours of my conversion, you've heard this story. Yeah. I had a Bible in my hand and a mentor in my life.
Yeah.
And my mentor's name was Rick. I'll never forget him. He showed me how to read scripture. He taught me how to pray. He told me, John, the most important thing you'll do every day is to spend time with Jesus.
Yeah. Wow.
And so being invited into not only that teaching of his, but then he invited us into his life, me and several other young men. Yeah. And we played basketball together. We went out to the restaurant together. We were able to watch Rick operate as a Christian in the real world. And it was such an amazing start to my journey. And there was an organic piece to that, and there was a little bit of an organized piece. And I wish every new believer in Jesus would have a similar beginning.
Yeah.
Discipleship, as Jesus exemplified it, is relational.
Yes.
At its core. I mean, obviously he transferred information to the 12, right? I mean, he had teaching time with them. But discipleship is more about transformation and life change than it is information. Here's the thing. I can't control who wants to be discipled or not. That's a lag measure, right? I have no control over that. The lead measure for me include me as the leader reaching out to a few people and inviting them into that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Creating space to observe people. I just had breakfast this morning with a young man, 29 years old, Christian, and just dealing with stuff, right, that normal people deal with. And I don't know if there's going to be a discipling relationship emerging from that, but I would hope so, because I'm an old guy and I've learned a few things along the way, and he's wrestling with things that I wrestled with at age 29.
Sure.
Too. And at age 29, it seems like it's the end of the world thing, like if I mess this up, my life's over, So I don't know. I think the last 16, 17 months, Jim, have really kind of pushed this possible new metric to the forefront. What do you think about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it should have been all along. I get so frustrated with systems sometimes because you like the public education system, and this is no slight on any teacher or administrator of public schools, but
yeah, we appreciate what teachers do, right?
yeah, but it was designed during the Industrial Revolution to give the average person enough education to be useful on the assembly line. And I hate that the church, again, let's be very careful not to do the same thing to believers. We need to send you to a class so that you can become basically educated to become laborers in the factory of church growth. Jesus didn't disciple that way. It was very personal, very, there was as he's teaching, we read the books like the major thing. If you read between the lines, they walked from this town to that town. Well, that was a 3-day walk. So between major things, there was campfires. There was the Sea of Galilee. There were sunrises and sunsets and roosters crowing and dogs barking and bread being broken. And, there was a lot of relationship between Jesus and 12 guys. And those 12 guys, we could draw a straight line from those 12 guys to our eternity. So it wasn't a waste of time to have deep relationship with a handful of people. Jesus had his 1 in John, his 3, and Peter, James, and John, his 12 and the 12 disciples, and his 120. And I think we do well to say who is our 1, who is our 3, who is our 12. And I think it's okay if the person that's in our 3 today is not in our 3 a year from now, because we release them to get their own 3.
That might even be advisable, right? I mean,
yeah. I think the difference between a clique, a club, and a church, right, is we release people to go be what we've trained them to be. Yeah.
So the first 3 were a flawless guest experience. These are possible new lead measures.
Yeah.
A crisp and powerful worship encounter. Nothing drives me crazier as a guest than a service that is full of wasted space. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
An organic and organized approach to discipling.
Yeah.
And then here's a 4th one.
Yeah.
That I think we have a lot of control over, Jim, and that is preaching and teaching that connects.
Yes. Yeah.
Preaching and teaching that connects. We have an absolute tsunami of information at our fingertips.
Yeah.
The problem is we often don't know what to do with that information.
Yeah.
We don't know how to take it and make it work in our day-to-day existence. I have a new friend. His name is Andy Swart. And Andy is the teaching pastor at a church in Keller, Texas. Yeah. And he taught me a lot about this particular lead measure. Just this, probably in the last 12 months, we had Andy on one of our huddles, pastor huddles, teaching this or presenting on this subject of how to preach effectively, teach effectively. And he gave us 3 things to think about as it related to that lead measure. First one is to know the word.
Yeah.
Know the word. Effective talks start in the study. And he talked about preparing thoroughly and prayerfully. He said this, that microwave talks rarely move people.
Sure.
It's those messages that the messages that we preach that are the most effective are the messages that we let work on us first.
Yeah.
So I love it. Know the word. Secondly, know your people.
Yeah.
He said this, it takes more work to preach in the language of our hearers. But we can do it, as long as we practice it diligently. Under that point, he says, discover their problems and preach with those problems in mind.
Yes.
And here's the 3rd one. Under this 4th lead measure, I'm just trying to give you some practical thoughts here. And that is to know yourself. So know the word, know your people, and know yourself. Some pastors fall into the trap of denying their God-given wiring and gifting. And in their admiration for their favorite preachers, and I have done that many years ago when I was a young guy. We can be tempted to preach or teach like they do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I tried that one time, Jim. Actually, only once.
Yeah. and we all know why. It only happened once, right?
Yes. I was about 23 years old, year out of college. And I try to preach like the fiery revivalist R.W. Schambach. Now, many people won't know who R.W. is, but if you're in our tribe, you know who he is.
Yeah.
Jim, it was the worst sermon I ever preached.
Yeah.
It was horrible. Absolutely. And people looked at me like, that's not you.
Right.
Stop. Yeah. Thankfully, they were gracious to this 23-year-old kid. So, no, part of
preaching and teaching in a way that connects is knowing how God's wired you, and then just be true to that on the platform. What do you think about this third piece, Jim?
Well, it's funny you're talking about preaching like R.W. Shambach. I remember I used to be part of like a youth choir, a small, really bad youth choir when I was a GI. And I remember we went to sing in this place, and they wanted us to all kind of walk down the hallways and sing "Lord of the Harvest, Place Your Fire in Me." So it was we can't be heard. And I'm singing bass, and they're singing tenor, and I don't, So I said, "Don't worry, we're gonna play the track that has the words on it." So the guy singing is going to be singing, and you're just going to be kind of background. And I came out like some sort of a Christian Milli Vanilli lip syncing. It was like, to this day, I'm embarrassed. I want to send an apology note to those that are still alive in 1984 when that happened, 1985, because it was just, I pictured that like I'm gonna lip sync. When God made me an original, I'm going to do lip syncing. It doesn't make any sense. And people know that. I mean, if we have anything, we got a bologna sandwich meter on us. That's pretty good. We know when people are faking it. That's why we don't trust the car salesman the way we trust our neighbor. That's why we don't trust the guy that's going to date our daughter, because we used to be that guy. And we have a pretty good bologna sandwich meter, So I would say that, I would rather hear sincere and not great preaching, because in the sincerity, there's a value. In the person's heart, there's a value. Then to hear the hermeneutics of Lucan historiography, brilliantly displayed, and it doesn't apply to me. It wasn't sincere. It didn't come from your heart. This is pretty simple stuff, and yet it's profound when we recognize God wants to use you, not your imitation of somebody else.
These four possible methods are not exhaustive, right? I think many more of them probably exist.
Yeah.
But I think we're in a brave new world, and I fear if we try to reestablish the old metrics, which were primarily lag measures, we're going to miss what God is trying to teach us here.
You're going to miss it.
So if I could just say this, work on what you can control.
Yeah.
Plant and water. Those are lead measures. And trust God for what you can't control.
Yeah.
Which are the results and the lag measures. Those are lag measures. And if you're not getting good results, back up and look at the lead measures. Maybe those need some fine tuning. Maybe some of those lead measures need to be kicked to the door.
Yeah.
And I think and then we're wrapping up here, Jim, because we're really over time here.
Yeah.
I think these new metrics hold the promise of more peace for pastors.
Certainly.
They require more faith, but they keep the credit for the results where they belong.
Yeah.
Squarely on the shoulders of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's our heart today with this. It's not to say we've got this understood totally or we've nailed this. We're wrestling with this. And we want you that are listening to wrestle along with us and figure this out in your context.
Yeah. That's great. I love it. Jesus calls the Pharisees hypocrites because they're nothing but actors and pretenders and posers. And yet Paul comes back and says, I become all things to all men, so that by all possible means, but he says, not my imitation of John, my imitation of Peter's, I have become, I relate to my audience now. I understand what they're going through. That's very biblical and easily applied, right? Have lunch with somebody. Tell me what I don't know about the average person in my congregation. They'll talk, So, John, thank you so much again. I know we're out of time, but thanks for everything. This is just a great opportunity for our hearts to come together, our staffs to come together, our families to come together and ask the right questions at the same time. So God bless you, our dear listener. We're out of time, but we hope that you will join us again very soon as we continue to lead from alignment.